Hey everyone, and welcome back to High Energy Podcast. My name is Esteban. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about incubation and innovation and EVs and the Olympics and so much. And I'm so excited to have this next guest. You've got a really cool job, and I'm like a creative. Specifically I like to do a lot of comedy, and sometimes when I think about comedy, I think about like I the way that stand-up works is you're workshopping. So you're workshopping ideas and you're like trying ideas and you're throwing ideas on a wall. So when I saw that you were going to be on the show, I was like, oh, your job is a little bit of like workshopping ideas and throwing ideas and working with people who are testing ideas and see what works. So I'm so excited, me genuinely excited and interested to have this conversation because you're the director of City Climate Innovation at LA Cleantech Incubator. We're going to talk about what that is. We're going to talk about cities and what other cities can learn from what LA is doing really great. And Cleantech Incubator, we're going to talk about like experimenting, all the stuff you've got going on. So thank you for being here. Please welcome to the show, Jack Symington.
Great to be a guest here. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so happy you're here. Okay, so you're the director of City Climate Innovation at LA Cleantech Incubator. I mentioned that. For those who don't know, can you give us like just an overview of what is the LA Cleantech Incubator?
Yeah, of course. So the LA Cleantech Incubator, or LACI, is Los Angeles's premier nonprofit business incubator focused on renewable energy companies, zero emission transportation companies, and sustainable cities companies, which is mostly focused on circular economy, so repurposing waste streams. Founded by LADWP a little bit back in the day, that's the local Department of Water and Power, spun off as an independent nonprofit. So top line mission is we call it build an inclusive green economy in Southern California and beyond.
That's cool. So this was actually created by the LA government?
Yeah, created by the government, the municipal water and power utility. They wanted to do innovative things in the water system and the energy system. So they would experiment, have this little incubator that could surface some new companies. And then they realized that it could be a better version of itself as an independent nonprofit. So we've been that way ever since 2011.
Wow. So every time I'm getting water in LA, I'm like, these people also are helping find incredibly innovative solutions to today's biggest problems.
They are. Yeah. They're
Wow.
working hard at it.
It's not just water. That's really cool. And you're the City Climate Innovation Director. I know we're going to get into it a bit more, but can you also just walk through what that is? Because to me, and we've talked to a bunch of people who like work on the grid or things that maybe feel a bit more familiar to people. And my sense is something like an incubator feels like abstract. So I'm trying to make it real tangible for.
Sure. It is a few different buzzwords, right? Like city climate innovation.
Do you guys do synergy? Are you into
we
synergy?
Have lots of
Oh,
synergy.
good.
Yeah. We leverage public assets. No, the part of it is working with city governments to figure out how they can integrate new technologies better, more quickly, kind of iterate through pilots to figure out what works, and then hopefully do something at scale after that. So it's LACI's ethos, in a way, is to work with the public sector. That's kind of square one. We came from a municipal agency. You're not going to change energy or transportation without working with the public sector in some regard. So my role is to work with all the startups that we have and figure out how they can slot into initiatives that the city wants to do, or how they can propose things that the city maybe hasn't thought of yet.
That's fascinating. And part of, I think you mentioned this, and I saw this, part of what you're also doing is taking some of the learnings from LA and sharing them with other cities, right?
Los Angeles is really leading in a lot of ways. We have a lot of good energy around innovation and incubation. We've been running pilots around renewable energy or transportation for the last 3 or 4 years. Happy to get into that more, but a bunch of other cities were jealous of Los Angeles having an entity like LACI. And so they're like, we want some sort of intermediary to translate between startups and city government so that we can meet some of our priorities. And so we got some funding to do this, an initiative with 9 cities across the country to do a different zero emission delivery pilot of their choosing. So there are a lot of other folks on my team who do a lot in Los Angeles, and I still do some, but then I'm kind of helping coordinate amongst other, progressive, innovative cities to try and get them what they need.
Can you give us an example of what one of these pilots would be?
Sure, in another city.
Yeah. Or maybe even the full thing of like they saw this in LA, said,
Yeah.
oh, let's modify it for our city in this way.
Okay.
Almost like the whole process.
Yeah. So a couple of examples. We've done a lot on passenger mobility. So that's getting folks into EVs as much as possible. We had a program with a company of ours called Envoy, a portfolio company that we incubate because we're like a traditional incubator. We help these companies grow. We give them resources. We connect them with investors. So a company called Envoy, which does EV mobility as a service, type of an amenity that you might find in apartment building, that it's like a zip car for the residents of that apartment building. They can check out it by the hour. They don't need to own a car, but they can still get access to an EV. We worked with them to, with a little bit of subsidy, roll out their product in housing authorities in Los Angeles at Hackla Properties. So some in Pico Gardens, some in San Pedro, and then with a community organization in Pacoima as well. And so that was one where it's, all right, car ownership is generally tough for these folks. How can we get them to get into an EV as much as possible? They'll rent by the hour. They use transit for a lot of things, but maybe it's something time sensitive like a doctor's appointment or running to get groceries, where just a personal vehicle for half a day is very helpful. That's one. A second one that we've done that we're really proud of is e-bike lending libraries with a bunch of bike shops in South LA, which is, again, getting people familiar with an e-bike, getting people to understand a lot of the progress that has been made on bike lanes in LA. There's still a lot of work to be done, but there's some good progress there. And so getting folks onto an e-bike rather at an affordable price, leveraging some of the community groups that like know how to speak the language of those communities. So we've been proud of that one too. Some people have even given up a car. Right? They were a 2-car household, and then they're like, actually, I can do a lot on an e-bike.
Yeah.
I only need one car, and then I can have an e-bike on the side.
That's awesome. So another city would see this and go, oh my gosh, of course, why aren't we offering similar models in our city?
Yeah.
And then they call you up and they go,
They call me up.
Make this happen, Jack.
Yeah, we've had our CEO Matt Peterson has done a really good job kind of being a leading voice nationally on this. So he might get the call and then kind of just forward it to me. So we have 9 cities total. 3 of them are doing this zero emission curbs pilot. So they're actually all focused on delivery too, and not just the people movement, but with the explosion of e-commerce, trucks crowding the street,
Yeah.
even DoorDash and Uber, like that stuff. There's a lot of demand for street space and curb space for all these deliveries. So we were running a project for a while that looked at how to manage the curb and actually create revenue for the cities by, appropriately charging these people to access desirable curb space. So that was in Pittsburgh, Santa Monica, and Los Angeles. And then we also are working with Portland, Oakland, New York, Louisville, Miami, and DC.
Cool. That's amazing. I feel
Yeah.
like we've talked a lot about a lot of things on this podcast, but some of the ideas you're talking about to me feel fresh and new. Like I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But if someone's like starting to look at someone from another city and they're starting to be like, oh, these are small things that can make our city a little bit better. Is there like lowest hanging fruit that you're like, ugh, if every mayor could just do this or think about things this way? Right? Even I'm hearing you talking, I'm like, oh, it's about like having people access to EVs. You can share that, right? It's like, of course, those models exist. Why aren't we doing more of that?
The one thing that every mayor should be doing is how to have private companies pay for the city assets that they're already using to some degree. Cities can't really regulate vehicles. They can't say you can only drive zero emission trucks on our street. But what they can say is, if you want to park on this curb at this intersection of 5th and Olive, it has to be a zero emission vehicle. Now they will want to see there be a good amount of adoption so that they know that it's possible for companies to visit that curb with a zero emission vehicle. But that can be one of the many carrots and sticks that they pull out. There's a lot of surplus land that could be used for charging infrastructure. We are seeing LA do that a little bit. Long Beach too, especially down by the ports, all the property that they own. It's all right. Well, if other landlords don't want to allocate space towards charging infrastructure, we have the space to do that. We could make money off of it by kind of having it be a concession agreement with some operator.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any of that lowest hanging fruit that, I mean, this last example, but that LA is not doing that you're like, ah, these are some things that are small but have big
You know,
impacts?
LA is doing a little bit of everything. They're doing the curb space. LA is always tough just because it's one county but 88 cities.
Yeah.
And so trying to coordinate across all of that can be difficult, right? You have, even in downtown LA, it is always funny to see like 6 or 7 different transit agencies come into downtown LA, all the way from Torrance, Santa Clarita, then you have the DOT, the Metro. So the coordination can be tricky there, but LA is making a lot of great investments in electrification on the bus side, in charging infrastructure. We're pushing on a few things, but
Yeah.
nothing that's like a glaring miss for sure.
Speaking of Southern California, speaking of LA,
hmm
very exciting. The Olympics are coming to LA. I know that you have been involved in some initiatives to make those really climate friendly,
hmm
right? Can you talk about what you're thinking about and you and your team are thinking about for the
Sure.
Olympics?
Yeah, sure. I'll throw out the initial disclaimer that anything I say is not the position of the organizing committee, LA28. But I'm happy to talk about a lot of the work that we've done with them. LACI has directed a lot of our initiatives towards setting targets for certain penetration of EVs by 2028. So, right, we want 80% of new car sales and 30% of all vehicles on the road to be battery electric by 2028. 40% of the trucks that go in and out of the port, 60% of all the delivery vans. A lot of numbers, but everything that we do in this space is geared around that. Like, are these actions that we're taking moving us closer to those targets? And so we have worked with the organizing committee, LA28, in the past to figure out how they can maximize EVs in their operations. So they're going to bring a couple thousand buses, even more just vehicles that are going to be ferrying around commercial sponsors, media, athletes, families, etc. In addition to all the other just extra demand that's going to come on. And so we worked with them to figure out where, based on venues, we should be installing charging infrastructure today that could support the electrification of those vehicles. These projects take a long time, so we really have to get on it today in the next 4 or 6 months in order to make sure it's there in time. But thankfully, we started this project back in 2022, 2020, end of 2022, beginning of 2023. Some of the fun findings that are really wins all around is working with school districts. They have to go zero emission, or they have to be purchasing zero emission buses starting in 2029. But we can get charging infrastructure into these school districts before 2028. LA28 can maybe charge there. Any number of vehicles could charge there. And then after the Olympics are gone, there's this great legacy investment that was made in the region. So
Yeah.
that's one of the bigger priorities that we've been pushing for.
That's really beautiful that the legacy of the Olympics might also be all these charging stations and this like, yeah,
Yeah.
electrification that's happened everywhere.
Their whole spiel has been they want to bring in as many EVs as possible. They need to make sure there's enough infrastructure to charge it all. Every single vehicle is mission critical, as they say. So there can't be down chargers. There can't be not enough. So if we can rally all the funding agencies, rally all the developers to make these investments, coordinate amongst the city, the county, the agency districts to get them in place in time, it'll make LA look better during the Olympics, and then it'll also put us 5-10 years ahead of existing goals for electrification.
Jack, if we're getting into some of the specifics of some of the things happening at the incubator, can you share some like technology or ideas that you've been really excited to see go through that process or bring into the world?
I'm partial to kind of electric propulsion, EVs. I think there's a lot going on, obviously, in material circularity and grid tech. Not as learned there, but a few that are really cool is this concept of vehicle to grid or vehicle to X technology, where your car with a battery in it, let's say you drive around all day and you only spend like 20% of the battery, you can plug in at night or in that 4 to 9 time frame where energy is more scarce, and then feed energy from that battery into the grid to power an AC unit in your house or in your neighbor's house, someone else down the street. So treating these cars as like mobile energy storage units that can dispatch energy when and where it's needed, is something that is just starting to get there, but could be a real game changer.
That's cool. Ideas like that are being thought about or in the incubator? Like, can you place that idea in the context of the work that you're doing, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely, because it ties into the value proposition, I would say, of owning an EV. If you're able to sell electricity back into the grid, it makes the case for ownership that much better, because you're not going to be doing it for free necessarily. There are programs out there, pilot programs out there that are, all right, what is a sensible rate to be paying for that person to send energy back into the grid? And it's tricky too, because you're working with the electrical grid and it's a massively regulated entity, and you have city permitting that gets involved there. There are lower tier things like the Ford F-150 Lightning that they put out, where it's, hey, like our battery can power the table saw at a work site. That's a smaller version of, all right, how do we then export it to an entire grid?
Yeah.
A lot more moving pieces.
I love that. I know some of those have even been framed like, oh, after a natural disaster or something like that, you've got an energy source.
Yeah.
That feels to me really compelling.
And that's part of the pitch for electric school buses as well, is that these can be community assets for the school district, where if there were power safety shutoffs or other blackouts, you could roll a bus up to a community center and then power the community center for 4, 8, 16 hours or something like that with the energy in the buses.
That's cool. Those are exciting ideas. Those feel like to work on a business that also benefits people in that way. It just feels
Yeah.
that feels like I'm like, cool. What is a difference that you've seen? Maybe like, it doesn't even have to be the specifics, but like the big picture. If someone's has like a clean tech startup versus, let's say, a traditional startup that people might think about, what are some of the differences between those two?
Not completely, but predominantly there's a little more of a hardware solution than a software. Obviously, there's software involved in it, but you are usually putting like a piece of equipment into a building. And so you got to manufacture that equipment. You have to work with the building owners. You have to work with the permitting agencies, building and safety, whatnot. You might have to work with the utility company then. And so every single pilot project, getting something out there, requires you to work with the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, that feels so like wildly collaborative, as opposed to, let's say, like, I'm making an app for people to date. Feels like you have to be like a good entrepreneur and like build a coalition well.
Yeah,
It's like community builder and entrepreneur.
Yeah, big coalition building, and it's tough work at times too, because no one really wants to install a new piece of technology into their building. That there's a natural conservative that's understandable to get over. But if you can build the coalition, show the benefits through modeling or testing or some smaller scale thing, that's how you can get it done.
If someone wants to get involved in like, and even is really interested by this idea of the incubator, what are ways for someone who's listening to like plug into that? Like, I know this is a little bit outside of your literal day-to-day, but yeah, but it's like, how, if someone's like, well, I didn't know that you could be involved in climate in some of these ways, or be involved with some of these really big public goals, but in this like more nimble, smaller, startup-y way. Like, how does someone plug into that? Or how does someone apply? How does someone join existing teams?
Well, if you have a startup idea and you're listening, we have incubation programs that you can apply for on a pretty rolling basis. We have kind of windows open twice a year for a good amount of time. So we're always happy to kind of hear your idea. Another one, and I failed to mention it earlier, but we have a team that focuses on supporting the startup companies. My team focuses on the public and private conversation. But then a third team actually focuses, it's called enhancing communities, and a big part of it is workforce development. We have a really interesting model too, where we incubate the startups. We can understand some pain points of theirs on the labor side of things and be like, all right, well, we need more people who know how to install chargers. So we then run a curriculum where we'll take residents from LA County and go through a 3-month boot camp for charging infrastructure installation. And then they're certified on the other end of it. And we have great record of job placement from there. But it's anything from project management, right? That's not really clean tech oriented necessarily. But as I said, installing these chargers are really complicated 2-3 year projects. And so being able to kind of see something from start to finish like that is helpful. We've had people who actually have been in Hollywood, and then it's like, all right, like making a movie, there are parallels there to making sure everyone's coordinated. So certainly check out any of the workforce programs that we have there. Trying to think of some other fun ones, like building energy management systems, right? It's like the building that we're in right now there's a lot of software that goes into running the thermostats, and there's a lot of new technology that can make those more energy efficient. But it's, at the end of the day, like a facilities management position.
That's awesome.
One of the other challenges that we are seeing is the behavior modification aspect is part of it, right? You're an EV driver too. Like, it's not the same as driving a combustion vehicle, right? You got to figure out where and when to charge. And on the fleet side, it becomes even more complicated. And so it does require this, we can't just take an electric bus or truck and run our operations like we always did and expect to get the benefits the same.
Yeah.
That is a huge component of this transition is, a small amount of behavioral change. And, understanding that if you have range anxiety, not a lot of people drive more than 300 miles in a week. Like, if you can charge once a day, you're probably okay. Road trips are a little different of an animal, but there's still a good amount of education and outreach to be done.
To me, it also feels like that behavior modification is built into some of the pilot programs you're running, right? So if I live in an apartment building now and have an EV, but right, if our complex had an EV that people would share, you'd be like, oh, I understand now. Or you like see the numbers, right? I think my charge is like 250 miles. So I'm like, oh, I don't have major charge anxiety because I'm going 20 miles at most a day.
Yeah.
And then, so that number is always in the hundreds. So I'm not, I don't often drive around being like, oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, people want as much range as possible, but you don't really need that much. The other thing I'd mention for the behavioral change, one of the other pilots that I'm supporting in Washington, D.C., it's getting Uber Eats and DoorDash drivers onto e-bikes instead of in cars or gas mopeds. And there's a lot of benefits that they can get from that. They can move through bike lanes in a way that cars and mopeds can't. It's way cheaper. So there's a lot of research to be done that this is great for cities because it reduces congestion. It kind of improves safety, but it requires biking instead of, even with a pedal assist e-bike, instead of being in a car, which people have just defaulted to often.
Yeah, that's really fun. It feels like you've got this fun job where you get to like look at all these parts that maybe are overlooked and be like, wait a minute, there might be a way to make this a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, a little bit healthier, a little bit better for like the air we breathe.
Yeah, and that is, and we try and frame everything in that quality of life discussion. It's better air, it's safer, less congested streets.
Yeah.
It's just a higher kind of quality of life. There's a lot of good information out there about, walking and biking versus driving and just what that does for your emotional state.
You'll get your Uber Eats ramen faster. It'll be hotter.
Yes.
You don't have to reheat it now.
That's a good point. It won't be stuck in traffic because it'll be zipping down the bike lane.
Yeah. Ugh, what a dream. That's a city I want to live in. No reheating food that's been delivered. All right, Jack, we have this really fun part of the show where people have questions. So they might be familiar with your work. They might be like, oh, here's a relevant question to someone that's kind of in the field that you're in. So we have a bunch of questions. Are you ready?
Shoot.
Here we go. This first question is from Ryan in Hanford. I feel like your job is sci-fi. You're imagining our electrical future. Is there a sci-fi book, show, or movie that inspires you or reflects your work? Do you agree that
Wow.
your job is sci-fi? The word incubator feels very
The word
sci-fi.
incubator does feel sci-fi. I often get asked if I'm like in agriculture and I'm incubating like eggs or chickens. We don't do that. We don't really touch on agriculture as an organization. Wow, sci-fi. There's a great book called Ministry for the Future.
Yeah.
Kim Stanley Robinson.
Kim Stanley Robinson.
Yeah, that's a great book. I read that a few years ago, and it really did encourage me to kind of keep on this path. I'd already been working in it for a little bit, but seeing all that still need to be done, and an interesting part of that, which is, I'm not a scientist. Unfortunately, it would be really cool if I was, but that book, they're kind of always wrangling with the public sector and public opinion and kind
Yeah.
of putting all these schemes into place. And so, recognizing that you need to be moving the public sector to get these sci-fi type inventions out there is still important. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kim Stanley Robinson has written a bunch of books that all feel like not utopian, but like sci-fi almost through a climate lens or through like almost like a policy lens. They're very readable if you haven't read them, but they're like they're like nerdy and interesting, but still a compelling story in the way what you're saying of like government navigating change in this like these like inter country panels, in organizations trying to regulate climate and climate catastrophe. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably number one.
That's a great one. All right, this next question is from Melissa. Is there something that you think LA residents can do to support the push towards electrifying LA for the Olympics and the Paralympics?
I think LA is making a lot of investments in the public transit system before the Olympics. And I think you've heard that from the mayor and from like 28, right? Is it car free? Is it transit first? It's, both and. And so I think there is a hope that with the infrastructure in place, people will be a little bit more comfortable. They'll see its effectiveness during the Olympics. There are, certainly limitations to it, but there is a virtuous cycle of, the more people are this goes to bike lanes too. So not just buses and rail, but even biking. And the more people are using that, the more funding, folks are willing to put into it because they don't see it as just throwing, good money after bad. They're like, oh, this is infrastructure people are using. We're going to keep funding it. That'll only improve the services, right? You can get, faster head times on the bus network if more people are paying into it. And using it, and the city sees that. So especially in the context of the Olympics, I think that's a big one, just because the county and city government have put a lot of effort into that. Because it's one of the interesting things too that the city of LA hosts, I think, maybe half of the events, right? You have Long Beach, you have Inglewood, you have Carson, that a lot of these other events are being held at, but they still are connected by the transit network as it is today.
Yeah.
And will be in 3-4 years.
This is the last question of the podcast.
Ooh.
Jack, we've done it. Look at us now. They said it couldn't be done. This is from Brandon. This is so great. What advice would you give to a high school student who wants to make a clean tech company?
Yeah.
Entrepreneurial young people, what are you saying to them?
Find a problem that really bugs you in something about like wasted time or movement or material, because that's where a lot of the effort is. It's how can we repurpose this waste stream in a way that saves more energy? How can we use less energy to do this? How can we move goods from A to B on fewer miles traveled, or like fewer stops along the way? And be if you want to be a founder, you probably got to obsess about that problem for a little bit. Don't get frustrated, but really just know that problem backwards and forwards. Find, iterate on solutions to that. Be willing to work with a team too. I think clean tech startups, it's not like the Silicon Valley software where just like one person can write a bunch of code and create a new app and they don't really need a team. You're going to need a team to make your vision a reality in the clean tech space.
That's great. I love that. I love the thought of like what's frustrating about wasted time, wasted resources, like starting with that, like almost like recontextualizing that frustration, find something you're really frustrated and then use that as fuel.
Yeah.
That's so great. That is it. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And thank you for listening to High Energy Podcast. Please keep submitting these really brilliant questions or any thoughts or feedback, anything. You can email highenergypodcast@socalren.org. We love it. We love it. Boy, would we love it if you could leave a review or subscribe or tell your friends and family. And that is it. Thank you, Jack, for being on the show. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you.